There are two types of riders: those who have continued their education beyond the basic course, and those riding with beginner tools. The parking lot class taught you critical fundamentals like throttle, braking, and turning at walking speed. What happens when you need to swerve in an emergency at 45 miles per hour, or trail brake when a corner tightens unexpectedly, or do hard braking at highway speeds? Those techniques exist, but they are in intermediate courses many riders do not know about. Here is the survival toolkit you are missing. Technique number 1. Let's start with emergency swerving. Basic courses teach countersteering and the idea of looking where you want to go, fundamentals that work in controlled scenarios. The problem is they practice at 15 miles per hour in parking lots. Real emergencies happen at 45 miles per hour with zero warning. When a car door swings open at 45 miles per hour, you need countersteering inputs dramatically more forceful than anything practiced in basic courses. The bar pressure required feels shockingly aggressive the first time, hard enough to make the bike snap sideways in a way that triggers your survival instincts. Basic courses teach emergency swerving through cone weaving, a necessary starting point. But there is a canyon-sized gap between weaving at 15 miles per hour and executing a full commitment swerve at highway speed. Most riders never bridge that gap. Real emergency swerving requires bar pressure so aggressive it feels wrong the first time. The bike snaps sideways hard enough to trigger panic if you have never felt it before. This is why it is not taught in day 1 courses. Beginners would fixate on the fear instead of building fundamental control, but most riders never progress to where it is taught. Japanese police figured this out decades ago. The Shirobai drill forces riders to swerve around obstacles at 40+ miles per hour with less than 20 feet of reaction distance. They are not doing it for fun. They are programming muscle memory that overrides the panic response when your brain locks up and target fixation tries to kill you. Here is what actually happens in an emergency. You see the obstacle, your brain freezes, your hands lock on the bars. You ride straight into the thing you are staring at because your body will not execute the movement you never practiced under stress. That is the real danger of stopping at beginner level training. Riders who have only practiced parking lot maneuvers at beginner speeds have zero tools when the real scenario hits. They freeze, they fixate, they crash. Then the accident report says rider error and everyone moves on like the training was fine. Accident analysis of successful collision avoidance shows riders used countersteering inputs far beyond what most riders have ever felt through the bars. That is not a small gap. That is the difference between a close call and a closed casket. The technique itself is not complicated. You need to understand that emergency countersteering is a push, not a lean. When the obstacle appears, you push the handlebar on the side you want to go, hard, fast, aggressive enough that the bike feels like it is going to flip out from under you. Your body position matters too. Stay loose, let the bike move underneath you instead of fighting it. The mistake most riders make is tensing up and trying to muscle the bike through the swerve. That is how you high-side yourself into oncoming traffic. Critical safety note: this technique should be practiced progressively in controlled environments, empty parking lots, closed courses, or track days with instruction. Start at low speeds and gradually build up. Attempting full-force swerves at highway speed without progressive practice is exactly how riders crash. This is not about riding aggressively all the time. It is about having access to the response when you need it. The beginner curriculum is not wrong. It is incomplete. The smooth techniques taught on day 1 are essential building blocks, but most riders never take the next step to learn how those fundamentals scale up to real-world speeds and scenarios. Technique number 2. Trail braking is the technique most conspicuously absent from beginner training. Basic courses teach that all braking should be done before the turn, which is absolutely correct advice for novice riders who are still learning throttle control and lean angles. The problem is, many riders never learn what comes next. The reality is this: trail braking is your only tool when you have entered a corner too hot, when the radius tightens unexpectedly, or when road conditions change mid-turn. It is taught in intermediate courses such as the Motorcycle Safety Foundation Advanced Rider course and in track schools, but most riders never take those courses, leaving them with beginner skills facing advanced problems. Every professional racer trail brakes. Every police rider trail brakes. It is fundamental speed control, not exotic wizardry. The question is timing. When should it be introduced in a rider's development? Current training says after you have mastered the basics. But how many riders actually continue their education? Training organizations classify it as intermediate and advanced because teaching it properly requires riders who already have solid throttle control, brake feel, and comfort with lean angle. Teaching trail braking to someone still learning basic cornering would create more danger than safety. That leaves a gap for riders who stop training after the basic course. The technique itself is about progressive brake release as you increase lean angle. You are not grabbing a handful of front brake in mid-corner. You are carrying brake pressure into the turn entry, then smoothly releasing pressure as you add lean. This does two things. It keeps weight on the front tire for better grip and steering response, and it gives you a way to scrub speed if you realize you are coming in too fast. Without trail braking, your only option when you enter hot is to stand the bike up, straighten out, and hope you do not run into oncoming traffic. Japanese police academies teach trail braking early in their training. Their recruits undergo months of intensive daily riding instruction, not a 2-day weekend course. They build the foundation quickly, then add advanced techniques while still in a controlled training environment. American riders typically get 2 days of basic instruction, then never return for the advanced course where trail braking is actually taught. The danger of stopping at basic training is that riders develop zero instinct for mid-corner speed adjustment, so when they inevitably enter a decreasing radius turn too fast, their only programmed response is target fixation and running wide. That is how riders end up in the oncoming lane or off the cliff. Not because trail braking is dangerous, but because nobody taught them the one technique that could have saved them. Why beginners should not trail brake? If you are still learning basic throttle control and smooth braking, adding trail braking will overload your available attention. You will either overbrake and wash the front, or fixate on braking and miss the turn entirely. Master your basic braking and cornering separately first, then combine them under instruction. Trail braking is not a substitute for poor entry speed. It is a correction tool, not an excuse. The common mistake is not trail braking itself. The common mistake is panic grabbing the front brake mid-corner, which loads the front tire so fast it washes out. Proper trail braking is smooth, progressive. You release pressure as lean increases, you do not add it. But instead of teaching the difference between proper technique and panic braking, courses often ban the whole concept and act like corners are always predictable. Technique number 3. Modern training emphasizes avoiding slides entirely, and for beginners, that is the right call. On street tires, uncontrolled slides usually mean a rider has exceeded their skill level. The problem is that many riders never learn what a controlled loss of traction feels like. So when the rear steps out unexpectedly, on gravel, oil, or wet leaves, the panic response turns a manageable situation into a crash. This is not about inducing slides. It is about not panicking when one happens. Older riders and dirt bike veterans already know this. They understand how to modulate rear brake pressure to maintain control when traction suddenly changes. Think gravel in a corner, an oil patch mid-turn, or a decreasing radius curve where you are already committed. These are scenarios where understanding rear tire behavior can prevent panic reactions. Important distinction. This is not about learning to drift your street bike through corners for fun. This is about having felt a controlled slide in a safe environment such as a parking lot or a dirt bike course, so when your rear steps out on gravel, you do not panic. The panic response, chopping throttle, grabbing the front brake, or locking the bars, is what turns a manageable slide into a crash. The technique requires feel. You apply rear brake pressure until you feel the tire start to break loose, then modulate that pressure while using body position and throttle to manage the situation. Too much pressure and you high side when grip returns. Too little and you have not adjusted to the conditions. The goal is maintaining chassis stability while the rear tire finds grip. Modern riders have never felt what a slide feels like because ABS and traction control handle everything. That is fine until those systems encounter conditions they cannot manage. ABS can struggle on gravel or deep sand. When that happens, riders who have never experienced traction loss have zero instinct for recovery. They panic, they lock up, they crash. Experienced riders, particularly those with dirt bike backgrounds, report using rear traction awareness to navigate gravel patches oil slicks, and other low-traction scenarios where panic would cause an immediate washout. This is not about abandoning ABS or modern safety systems. It is about having the skill set for when those systems cannot help you. ABS and traction control have saved countless riders from crashes. That is undeniable. But these systems work best on pavement. Hit gravel, deep sand, or ice, and ABS can actually extend stopping distance by preventing the tire from scrubbing. Riders who have never felt traction loss have no instinct for when to override the electronics. The real danger is riders who were trained to fear any loss of traction because they were never taught what it feels like in a controlled environment. So when they hit that gravel patch or oil slick, their programmed response is to freeze and hope the electronics save them. Sometimes the electronics do, sometimes they do not. And when they do not, the rider has no backup plan because advanced training that covers this scenario was never taken. Technique number 4. Body position during emergency braking is rarely discussed in basic training beyond the advice to stay relaxed and centered. But physics does not care about comfort. Under hard braking, weight transfers forward whether you want it to or not. Upright, neutral positioning is correct for normal riding and moderate braking. But emergency threshold braking, when you are squeezing every last foot of stopping distance out of your tires, fighting the natural forward weight transfer actually reduces front tire traction when you need it most. Here is what actually happens under hard braking. Weight transfers forward naturally. The front suspension compresses, the rear becomes light. Fighting this with an upright posture reduces the front tire contact patch and increases stopping distance. What you need to do is work with the weight transfer, not against it. That means shifting your weight forward, dropping your chest, and deliberately loading the front tire. It is not style, it is physics. Japanese police drill this as part of their threshold braking technique. They treat an aggressive body position as part of the braking system itself, not a separate style choice. When they practice panic stops, they slide forward on the seat, drop their chest toward the tank, and put weight on the bars. This loads the front tire, prevents the rear from lifting, and gives them maximum stopping power without anti-lock braking system assistance. This is practiced at speed in controlled environments with instruction, and it is not something to attempt for the first time during an actual emergency. The challenge with teaching this in basic courses is that beginners who are not yet smooth with threshold braking will overcommit, lock the bars, and prevent the suspension from working properly. You must be comfortable with progressive braking first. Once you have that foundation, active weight transfer can measurably reduce stopping distance. The exact sequence matters. As you apply the front brake, you slide forward on the seat. Your chest drops toward the tank. Your arms stay slightly bent, not locked. You put weight on the bars to load the front tire, but not so much that you fight the suspension. The rear brake receives light pressure to keep the back end planted, but most of your stopping power comes from that loaded front tire. The mistake most riders make is staying rigid and upright during emergency braking. That reduces front tire traction right when you need it most, and it can cause the rear to lift or the front to wash out. Track testing and rider experience suggest an aggressive forward position can measurably reduce stopping distance compared to a rigid upright posture, enough to turn a collision into a close call. That is not a small margin, that is life or death distance. Do not use an aggressive forward position at low speed during normal braking or in any situation where you need to look around, for example when checking blind spots or navigating traffic. This technique is specifically for emergency threshold braking, when every foot of stopping distance matters. The technique is not complicated. It is not an exotic skill that takes years to master. It is basic physics applied to emergency braking. Shift your weight forward, load the front tire, stop faster. But it requires a foundation of smooth, progressive braking first, which is why it is reserved for intermediate training rather than day one. Technique number 5, rev-matching. Rev-matching, blipping the throttle during downshifts to match engine revolutions per minute to road speed, is becoming a lost art. Modern bikes solve the problem it addresses with slipper clutches and quick shifters. These systems work excellently and have legitimately prevented countless crashes from ham-fisted downshifts. But relying entirely on electronics means riders never develop the feel for what is actually happening in the drivetrain. Is it unnecessary with modern bikes? For 95% of riding, yes. Slipper clutches are reliable and effective. But what happens when you rent an older bike on vacation, borrow a friend's vintage ride, or when you want to understand what your bike is actually doing mechanically instead of just trusting the electronics? Here is what rev matching actually does. When you downshift without matching engine speed to wheel speed, the rear wheel wants to lock up. That is engine braking, trying to slow the wheel faster than the road surface allows. With a slipper clutch, the system absorbs that shock. Without one, you get rear wheel hop, chassis instability, and potentially a locked rear tire right when you are trying to brake hard into a corner. Smooth, stable, no drama. The technique itself requires timing. You are pulling the clutch, blipping the throttle to raise engine speed, selecting the lower gear, and releasing the clutch all in one fluid motion. The throttle blip has to be precise. Too much, and you are over-revving the engine. Too little, and you still get that rear wheel hop. The sweet spot is matching the engine revolutions per minute exactly to the speed the rear wheel will be turning in the lower gear at your current road speed. Police and track riders still drill rev matching because it develops fine clutch and throttle control that improves all aspects of riding. It is less about the unlikely failure of a slipper clutch and more about developing mechanical sympathy, understanding exactly what your inputs are asking the bike to do. Eventually, riders can downshift multiple gears while braking hard without even thinking about it. That is not an advanced technique. That is fundamental machine control that deepens your connection to the machine. The downside of electronic dependency is not catastrophic failure. It is limited versatility. Riders who have only used slipper clutches struggle when switching to older bikes, vintage machines, or even some modern bikes from manufacturers that do not include the feature. The skill gap becomes obvious when they dump the clutch mid-corner and induce rear wheel hop, or when they over-rev the engine trying to compensate, which causes its own set of problems. The real-world scenario where this matters most is a steep downhill section with tight corners. You need multiple downshifts while braking. Without rev matching, you are either locking the rear or over-revving the engine. Neither option is good. The common mistake is dumping the clutch after a downshift without blipping the throttle. This causes rear wheel hop at best, a locked rear tire at worst. That hop destabilizes the chassis and can break traction entirely. In a corner, that is how you crash. On a downhill, that is how you lose all control. The technique prevents this by keeping the drivetrain loaded smoothly throughout the downshift sequence. No shock loading, no wheel hop, just smooth, controlled engine braking. Slipper clutches are excellent technology that make bikes safer and easier to ride, but learning rev matching develops the clutch and throttle coordination that makes you better at everything: smoother upshifts, better throttle control, and more precise braking. It is not about the electronics failing, it is about understanding the machine. Here is the reality. These techniques are not banned. They are taught in intermediate and advanced courses that most riders never take. Basic training does exactly what it should: teach fundamental control in a safe, progressive way. The problem is not the curriculum. The problem is that most riders stop learning after day 2. The beginner course teaches you to avoid crashing in a parking lot. Intermediate courses teach you to handle real-world surprises. Advanced training teaches you to survive the worst-case scenarios. But only a small minority of riders ever take that second course, let alone the third. So you have beginner skills facing advanced problems and wondering why their 2-day course did not prepare them for everything. The real question is not why are these techniques banned. The real question is, why do so few riders continue their education? Maybe advanced courses are not accessible enough. Maybe they are too expensive. Maybe riders do not know they exist. Or maybe everyone assumes that a weekend basic course was sufficient for a lifetime of riding. It is not sufficient. It was never meant to be. If you learned emergency swerving at 15 miles per hour 5 years ago and have not practiced at real speed since, you do not know how to emergency swerve. If you were told all braking before the turn and never learned what comes next, you are riding with beginner tools. If you have never felt what a controlled slide feels like, you will panic when it happens. The action step is clear. Continue your education. Find an intermediate course. Book a track day with instruction. Take a police-style riding course. Try dirt bike training to learn traction management. These are not luxuries. They are the difference between handling an emergency and becoming a statistic. Which of these techniques do you actually know how to execute at speed? Not in theory, in practice. Which ones are you realizing you need proper instruction on? Drop a comment with the specific training you are going to book. And subscribe so we can keep pushing riders to close the gap between what they learned once and what they can actually do when it counts.